As Trump's envoys fly home from Moscow, President Volodymyr Zelensky's high-stakes meeting in Brussels is abruptly cancelled, leaving diplomats scrambling. A planned meeting between Zelensky and a Trump delegation in Brussels was scrapped at the very last minute, just as expectations were building for a possible breakthrough in negotiations. Kyiv Post correspondent Alex Raufoglu stated on X that the Brussels meeting is called off, just as Zelensky abruptly shifted plans and began heading back home to Kyiv. Kremlin-linked sources claim that the US envoys promised to fly straight back to Washington immediately after their talks in Moscow, according to the Kyiv Post. US officials have not confirmed that pledge, which has only fueled suspicion and speculation over what exactly changed behind closed doors to derail the Brussels session. Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov said that 5 hours of talks with US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner produced no concrete compromise, despite the intensity and length of the discussions. However, Ushakov also described the marathon conversation as constructive, while cautioning that it still remained far from anything resembling a final, signed peace agreement. The revised proposal on the table reportedly followed European and Ukrainian inputs intended to correct or soften several Russia-leaning terms from earlier drafts. Ushakov added that any potential presidential-level meeting between Trump and Putin depends on what progress we can achieve, signaling that leaders will only step in once groundwork is laid. Russian officials outlined 3 non-negotiable red lines for any movement toward peace: control over Donbass territory, binding limits on Kyiv's military, and Western recognition of Russia's claims.
The conversation between Putin and Witkoff and Kushner was very useful, constructive, and very meaningful. It lasted not for 5 minutes but for 5 hours. Naturally, we discussed with US colleagues the content of those drafts of Ukraine peace plans, those documents which the Americans submitted to Moscow some time ago. We went through these documents. We did not discuss any specific formulas, any specific American proposals. We discussed the essence of what was there in those American documents. We could agree with certain things, and the President, Vladimir Putin, confirmed this to his interlocutors. We criticized some things, and the President did not hide our critical, even negative attitude to a number of proposals. We agreed with our US colleagues that we would not disclose the substance of the negotiations that took place. This is quite logical, as the negotiations were absolutely confidential and closed to the public. As I know, after the talks, our US colleagues went to the US Embassy where they will report to Washington. Then they will go to Washington and report in person to President Trump on what they discussed with President Putin in the Kremlin. Moscow also floated what it called huge prospects for future US-Russian economic cooperation, signaling that trade and investment could follow any political thaw.
Russian financier Kirill Dmitriev posted a photo from the meeting with a single-word caption, "productive," hinting at upbeat expectations from the Kremlin side. Strikingly, before receiving the American envoys, President Vladimir Putin reportedly made them wait for about an hour, a familiar signal of dominance in Russian diplomatic theater. Reports claim that during this delay, Putin was delivering a blistering public message to Europe, using harsh language to frame the continent as an obstacle to peace. Before sitting down with Witkoff and Kushner, Putin openly accused European governments of sabotaging peace efforts and blocking pathways to a negotiated end to the war. "If Europe wants to fight with us, we are ready for it," the Russian president warned, making clear that Moscow is prepared for prolonged confrontation if diplomacy fails. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio remained in Washington throughout the drama, but he publicly expressed cautious, guarded optimism about the direction of the talks. Rubio said that Ukraine is ready to negotiate, even as he stressed that the war remains brutally costly for both sides in terms of lives, resources, and political capital. After 10 months of quiet back-channel diplomacy, Rubio acknowledged that we've gotten closer, but we're still not there, indicating that key gaps and disagreements persist. Rubio told Fox News that any real breakthrough in the peace process ultimately depends on Putin, underscoring that the final decision rests in the Kremlin, not in Western capitals.